In the quiet valley where the Blue Ridge Mountains met the Shenandoah River, there was a small town called Cedarhollow. It was the kind of place where mornings arrived slowly, wrapped in pale golden light that spilled over the hillsides like honey dripping from a warm spoon. The air there carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, and in autumn, the maple trees along Main Street turned colors so vivid they seemed painted by a gentle hand. At the heart of Cedarhollow stood Jefferson Elementary and Middle School, a red brick building with tall windows that caught the morning sun and held it there, casting soft amber rectangles across wooden floors worn smooth by generations of small feet. The school had been built in 1923, and though it had been renovated twice since then, it still held that old-world warmth, radiators that clanked and hissed in winter, brass doorknobs polished by a century of hands, and a bell tower that no longer rang but remained standing like a quiet guardian over the playground below. And in this school, every morning before the first bus arrived, a man named Solomon Birch walked the hallways alone. Solomon was 67 years old, though most people who saw him might have guessed older or younger depending on the day. His hair had gone silver many years ago, thick and wavy, and always neatly combed. His hands were large and capable, the kind of hands that had known hard work their whole lives, hands that could fix a broken desk or calm a crying child with equal gentleness. He wore the same soft blue work shirt every day, pressed and clean, tucked into sturdy canvas pants. On his feet were brown leather boots, resoled 3 times over the years, comfortable as old friends. He had been the janitor at Jefferson School for 19 years. Every morning, Solomon arrived at 5:30, when the sky was still purple-gray and the parking lot held only his old green pickup truck. He would unlock the side door near the gymnasium, the one with the sticky lock that only he knew how to coax open, and step inside to begin his quiet rounds. First, he checked the boiler room, listening to the low hum of the furnace like a doctor listening to a heartbeat. Then, he walked the hallways with a soft cloth, wiping down the brass doorknobs one by one, a ritual that brought him a kind of peace he could not quite explain. The building spoke to him in those early hours, the creak of settling wood, the whisper of air through old ventilation ducts, the distant tick of the clock in the main office. Solomon had come to know these sounds the way one knows the breathing of a sleeping child, intimately, protectively, with great tenderness. By 6:15, he would have the coffee brewing in the teacher's lounge, the grounds measured precisely the way Mrs. Patterson liked them, not too strong, not too weak. He would arrange the day's newspapers on the table by the window, even though hardly anyone read them anymore. It was simply what he had always done, and Solomon believed in the comfort of familiar rituals. By 6:45, the first teachers would begin to arrive. Miss Josephine Hart was usually first, a young woman in her second year of teaching 4th grade. She had kind eyes behind round glasses and a habit of humming to herself as she walked. She always smiled at Solomon and said, "Good morning, Mr. Birch," with genuine warmth, and he always nodded and replied, "Morning, Miss Hart. Coffee's ready." Then came Mr. Wendell Oates, the 7th grade history teacher, a large man with a booming laugh who taught his students about the Civil War by acting out the battles with dramatic gestures. He would clap Solomon on the shoulder as he passed, a wordless greeting between 2 men who understood each other. And then, gradually, the building would fill with sound and movement. The rumble of buses in the circular drive, the chatter of children, the bang of lockers, the shuffle of backpacks being dropped and picked up again. Solomon would retreat to his supply closet near the cafeteria, a small room with a single window that looked out onto the back field, where he kept his mops and brooms and cleaning solutions arranged with military precision. From there, he watched the day unfold. He had seen so many children pass through these halls over the years. Thousands of them, perhaps. Small ones clutching their parents' hands on the first day of kindergarten. Tall ones slouching through 8th grade, caught between childhood and something larger. He had watched them grow, year by year, like watching a garden change with the seasons. Some bloomed early and bright. Some took longer, needing patience and care. Some struggled in ways that broke his heart to witness. Solomon had learned long ago that a janitor sees everything and says very little. He saw which children ate lunch alone. He saw which ones wore the same clothes 3 days in a row. He saw the quiet tears wiped away in bathroom stalls, the crumpled notes passed between friends, the small acts of cruelty and kindness that made up the hidden world of childhood. He saw it all, and he held it gently in his heart, and he did what he could, in his own quiet way, to make things a little easier. A dropped pencil returned without comment, a stuck locker fixed before the bell rang, a kind word offered to a child who seemed to need one. These were Solomon's gifts, given freely, expected to go unnoticed. And for 19 years, they mostly had. The autumn that this story truly begins was painted in shades of amber and rust. The mountains surrounding Cedarhollow had turned to fire, and the morning air carried that particular crispness that made every breath feel clean and new. Solomon had spent the weekend raking leaves at his small cottage on Maple Lane, a modest house with a covered porch and a vegetable garden that he tended with devotion. His wife, Loretta, had passed 7 years ago, and the house felt larger now than it once had. But he had made his peace with the silence. He filled it with small rituals: morning coffee on the porch, evening walks along the river, Sunday suppers at the church fellowship hall, where the other elders treated him with the casual affection reserved for those who had always been there, steady and reliable as the sunrise. On Monday morning, Solomon arrived at the school as he always did, unlocked the sticky door, and began his rounds. But something was different that day, something he could not quite name. A feeling in the air, perhaps, a sense of waiting. He was wiping down the brass doorknobs on the third-grade hallway when he first saw her. She was small for her age, maybe 9 or 10 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had come slightly undone. She wore a purple sweater that was a size too big, the sleeves falling past her wrists, and she was sitting on the floor outside Mrs. Delacroix's classroom, her back against the wall, her knees pulled up to her chest. It was 6:20 in the morning, far too early for any student to be here. Solomon approached slowly, the way one might approach a startled bird. "Morning," he said softly. The girl looked up. Her eyes were large and dark, with the kind of depth that suggested she had already seen more of the world than most children her age. She did not seem frightened, only tired, deeply, heavily tired. "Morning," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Solomon studied her for a moment. He noticed the frayed edges of her sweater, the shoes that were clean but worn thin at the soles, the way she held herself, small and contained, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. "You're here early," he observed, keeping his tone gentle and conversational. "My mom drops me off on her way to work," the girl said. "She starts at 6. Solomon nodded slowly. He understood. He had seen this before, parents working early shifts, late shifts, double shifts, doing whatever they could to keep food on the table and a roof overhead. Children arrived early and stayed late, filling the gaps between their parents' work schedules and the official school hours. "What's your name?" he asked. "Marisol," she said. "Marisol Vega. That's a beautiful name. I'm Mr. Birch. I take care of the building." Marisol nodded, accepting this information without comment. She seemed comfortable with silence, which Solomon appreciated. Too many people filled quiet spaces with unnecessary words. "Well, Marisol," he said after a moment, "it gets cold out here in the hallway this early. Would you like to come sit in the cafeteria? I can turn on the lights for you. There's a table by the window where the sun comes in nice and warm." She considered this, then nodded. "Okay." He led her down the hallway, his footsteps soft on the wooden floor, her smaller footsteps following. The cafeteria was large and dim, the tables folded and stacked against the walls, the serving line shuttered and silent. But Solomon knew which light switches to flip to create a pool of warm illumination in the corner by the east windows, and he pulled down one of the tables for her, setting up a chair that faced the glass. "Sun should be up in about 20 minutes, he said. "Best seat in the house for watching it." Marisol sat down, her backpack in her lap, and looked out at the dark playground beyond the window. Solomon could see her reflection in the glass. A small, solemn face, watching and waiting. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome." He left her there and continued his rounds, but something about that moment stayed with him throughout the day. The image of her sitting alone in the early morning darkness, patient and quiet, waiting for the world to begin. The next morning, she was there again, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. By the end of the first week, it had become routine. Solomon would arrive at 5:30, complete his initial checks, and by 6:15, he would have the corner table set up in the cafeteria with the lights glowing softly and a small cup of hot cocoa waiting, made from the powder he brought from home, mixed with warm water from the teacher's lounge. Marisol never asked for the cocoa. He never announced it. It was simply there, and she simply drank it, and they exchanged the briefest of nods, and that was enough. Over the following weeks, Solomon began to learn small things about her. She was in Mrs. Delacroix's 4th grade class. She was good at math but struggled with reading. She had a younger brother named Tomas who was in 1st grade, and she walked him to his classroom every morning before going to her own. Their mother, Elena, worked as a housekeeper at the Mountain View Inn, starting at 6 in the morning and finishing at 3, then picking up a second job at the grocery store from 4 to 9. Their father was not in the picture. Solomon did not know the details, and he did not ask. He also learned that Marisol did not eat lunch. He noticed it on a Thursday in late October when he happened to be mopping near the cafeteria during the 4th grade lunch period. The room was full of noise and motion, children chattering and trading snacks and jostling for space. But in the corner, at a table by herself, sat Marisol. Her lunch tray was empty except for the free carton of milk that all students received, and she was sipping it slowly, making it last, her eyes fixed on some middle distance. Solomon watched from the doorway, his mop still in his hands, and felt something tighten in his chest. He knew about the free lunch program. He knew that some families qualified and some did not, and the line between those categories was often thin and arbitrary. He also knew that even families who qualified sometimes didn't sign up out of pride or confusion, or simply not knowing the paperwork existed. That evening, Solomon sat on his porch. As the sun went down behind the mountains, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, and thought about Marisol Vega. He thought about his own childhood, growing up poor in a different small town, not so different from this one. He remembered the hollow feeling of hunger during long school days. He remembered the shame of pretending he wasn't hungry, of saying he'd eaten a big breakfast when he hadn't, of learning to be invisible so no one would notice his empty tray. He thought about Loretta and how she would have handled this. She had always been better with children than he was, warmer and more easily affectionate. She would have known exactly what to do. But Loretta was gone, and Solomon was still here, and there was a child who needed help. The next morning, he arrived at the school a little earlier than usual. He stopped by the cafeteria kitchen, where the head cook, a cheerful woman named Dolores Mendez, was already preparing the day's meals. "Morning, Dolores," he said. "Morning, Sol. Coffee's not ready yet." "That's all right. I wanted to ask you something." He asked about the lunch accounts, how they worked, how much a meal cost, what happened when a child's account ran low. Dolores explained it all patiently, her hands never stopping their work as she spoke. Each student had an account linked to a number. Parents could add money online or send cash in an envelope. When the account ran low, the child received a notice. When it hit zero, they could still eat, but the debt accumulated, and eventually someone from the office would call the parents. Some families, Dolores said quietly, her eyes soft with understanding. They have a hard time. They do what they can. We never turn a hungry child away, but... She trailed off. They both knew the but. The debt, the notices, the quiet shame. Is there a way, Solomon asked slowly, for someone to add money to a child's account without the family knowing? Dolores looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. There's a way, she said. That afternoon, Solomon drove to the bank in town and withdrew $40 from his savings account. It was not a large account. His pension from the school district was modest, supplemented by Social Security. But he had always been careful with money, and Loretta had left him the house free and clear, so his needs were few. $40, he calculated, would cover lunch for Marisol for about 2 months. He brought the cash to the school office the next morning, in an envelope with Marisol's name and student number written on the outside. The school secretary, Mrs. Winslow, accepted it without comment. She had seen this before, anonymous donations from teachers, parents, community members. It was one of the quiet kindnesses that kept small towns running. The following week, Marisol began eating lunch. Solomon watched from the doorway, his mop in hand, as she carried her tray to her usual corner table. The tray held a sandwich, an apple, a small carton of milk, and a cookie. She ate slowly, carefully, savoring each bite. And when she finished, she sat for a moment with her hands folded in her lap, a look of quiet contentment on her face that Solomon had never seen before. He turned away before she could notice him watching, and went back to his supply closet and sat down on the overturned bucket he used as a chair, and felt something warm spread through his chest. It was not much, he knew. $40, a few lunches, a small kindness in a world that needed so many larger ones. But it was what he could do, and sometimes he had learned what you can do is enough. The weeks turned into months, and the months turned into seasons. Autumn gave way to winter, and the mountains of Cedarhollow disappeared under blankets of snow. The school transformed during those cold months, radiators hissing with warmth, children arriving bundled in coats and scarves, the hallways smelling of wet wool and hot chocolate from the cafeteria. Solomon adjusted his routines with the weather. He arrived even earlier now, to shovel the walkways before the buses came. He spread salt on the icy patches near the entrance, working methodically in the blue-gray light of early morning, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. It was hard work for a man his age, but he had always believed in earning his keep, and besides, the cold morning air cleared his head and made him feel alive. Marisol continued to arrive early, dropped off by her mother's old sedan at 6 o'clock sharp. She would hurry inside, her cheeks red from the cold, and make her way to the cafeteria corner where Solomon had begun leaving. Not just hot cocoa, but also a small muffin or granola bar, purchased with his own money from the grocery store and placed on the table as if it had always been there. She never mentioned the food. He never mentioned providing it. They had developed a silent understanding, a kind of wordless contract between them. He cared for her in small ways, and she accepted that care without question, and neither of them needed to examine it too closely. But he noticed changes in her over those winter months. She seemed a little less tired, a little more present. Her teachers began to comment, in the casual way teachers do, about her improvement. Mrs. Delacroix mentioned at a staff meeting that Marisol Vega had raised her reading level by 2 grades. Mr. Hendricks, the art teacher, displayed one of her watercolor paintings in the main hallway, a picture of mountains at sunset, rendered in soft purples and oranges that showed real talent. Solomon paused by that painting one evening while he was sweeping and stood looking at it for a long time. The mountains in the picture were clearly the ones surrounding Cedarhollow, but they seemed somehow more alive, more full of color and possibility. He wondered what Marisol saw when she looked at those mountains. He hoped she saw hope. The winter formal dance came and went, a middle school affair that Solomon spent cleaning up after, sweeping glitter and confetti from the gymnasium floor, while thinking about all the dances he had attended in his own youth, the nervous excitement, the slow songs, the heartbreak and joy of being young. He remembered dancing with Loretta at their high school prom, how she had worn a blue dress that matched her eyes, how he had stepped on her feet twice and apologized profusely, how she had laughed and told him it didn't matter. They had their whole lives to practice. They had practiced for 41 years, until cancer took her from him, and now he danced alone in the quiet gymnasium, sweeping in slow circles, remembering. Spring arrived gradually, the way it always did in the mountains, fighting its way through the last stubborn snows of March, and finally breaking through in April with a rush of green and bird song. The trees along Main Street budded, then leafed, then burst into full canopy. The river ran high and fast with snowmelt, and the air smelled of mud and new growth and possibility. Solomon planted his vegetable garden on the first weekend of May, as he did every year. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, green beans, cucumbers. He knelt in the soft earth and pushed seeds into the soil with his bare fingers, feeling the cool dampness of spring against his skin. Loretta had always handled the flowers, and he had never quite figured out her system, so the flower beds remained empty now, but the vegetables grew strong and true under his care. At school, the end-of-year activities began to ramp up. Field days and class parties and the 8th grade graduation ceremony, which was always held in the gymnasium on the second-to-last day of school. Solomon helped set up the chairs, row after row of folding metal seats, while the teachers hung streamers and the principal, Dr. Althea Reeves, fussed over the podium arrangement. Dr. Reeves was a tall woman in her early 50s, with graying hair that she wore in a neat bun and reading glasses that perpetually hung from a chain around her neck. She had been principal for 12 years, and in that time, she had transformed Jefferson School from a struggling institution into one of the best in the region. She was respected by teachers and feared in a gentle way by students, and she ran the building with a combination of firm discipline and genuine warmth that Solomon admired. He had worked with many principals over the years. Some had treated him like furniture, barely acknowledging his existence. Others had been cordial, but distant. Dr. Reeves was different. She knew his name, asked about his garden, remembered that he had lost his wife. Small things, perhaps, but they mattered. On the morning of the graduation ceremony, Solomon arrived earlier than usual. He wanted to make sure everything was perfect. He swept the gymnasium floor twice, polished the door handles until they gleamed, and arranged the chairs with mathematical precision. Then he retreated to his supply closet to change into his best work shirt, a pressed white one that he saved for special occasions, and waited for the day to begin. The students began arriving at 9 o'clock, the 8th graders in their graduation robes, nervous and excited, clutching caps that they weren't supposed to put on until the ceremony began. Their parents and grandparents and siblings streamed into the gymnasium, filling the rows of chairs, the noise level rising steadily as more people arrived. Solomon stood near the back, by the double doors, watching the crowd gather. He spotted Marisol Vega in the 3rd row, sitting with a woman who must be her mother. Elena, he assumed, though he had never met her. She was a small woman, not much taller than Marisol, with the same dark hair and tired eyes. She wore a simple dress that looked like it had been ironed carefully for the occasion, and she kept her hand on Marisol's arm, a gesture of pride and protection. Marisol was not graduating today. She was only in 4th grade, but her older brother Tomas was in 1st grade and had a small role in the ceremony, something about presenting flowers to the graduates. Solomon had helped set up the flower arrangements earlier, small bouquets of daisies, and baby's breath in paper cones. The ceremony began at 10 o'clock sharp. Dr. Reeves took the podium and welcomed everyone in her clear, measured voice. There were speeches and songs and the presentation of awards. Solomon watched from his post by the door, clapping when everyone else clapped, smiling when the children smiled. It was the same ceremony he had witnessed 19 times before, and yet it still moved him, the sight of all those young people standing on the threshold of something new. Halfway through the program, Dr. Reeves returned to the podium. The gymnasium fell quiet, waiting for the next award or announcement. "Before we continue," she said, "I'd like to take a moment to recognize someone special, someone who has been part of this school community for nearly 2 decades, working quietly behind the scenes to make Jefferson a better place for all of us." Solomon felt a small flutter of unease. He did not like attention, did not seek recognition. He preferred the shadows, the margins, the quiet spaces where he could do his work without fanfare. 19 years ago, Dr. Reeves continued, a man came to work at this school. He came every day, rain or shine, summer and winter. He fixed what was broken. He cleaned what was dirty. He made sure our building was safe and warm and welcoming. And he did it all without ever asking for thanks or recognition. The flutter of unease grew stronger. Solomon glanced toward the exit, wondering if he could slip away unnoticed. "But what many of you don't know," Dr. Reeves said, her voice softening, "is that this man did something else, something quiet and kind and extraordinary." She paused, and in that pause, the gymnasium seemed to hold its breath. "For the past 2 years, this man has been paying for school lunches out of his own pocket, not for his own children or grandchildren. He doesn't have any, but for children in this school who needed help, children whose families were struggling, children who might otherwise have gone hungry." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Parents turned to look at each other, confused, curious. He never told anyone what he was doing. He never asked for recognition or repayment. He just saw a need and filled it quietly, month after month, because that's the kind of person he is. Dr. Reeves looked toward the back of the gymnasium, toward the doors where Solomon stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. "Mr. Solomon Birch," she said, "would you please come forward?" For a long moment, Solomon didn't move. He could not move. The attention of the entire gymnasium was focused on him, hundreds of eyes turning, searching, finding him there by the doors in his pressed white shirt, his weathered face flushed with surprise and something that might have been embarrassment. Then, slowly, he began to walk. The aisle between the chairs seemed very long. His boots made soft sounds on the gymnasium floor. He was aware of people watching him, of the silence that had fallen over the room, of Dr. Reeves smiling at him from the podium. When he reached the front, she extended her hand, and he shook it, his grip firm despite the trembling he felt inside. "Mr. Birch," she said, her voice warm, "on behalf of the entire Jefferson School community, I want to thank you for 19 years of service, for your dedication, your kindness, and your quiet generosity. You have made a difference in the lives of countless children, and we are deeply grateful." She turned to the audience. "I'd like to present Mr. Birch with this plaque in recognition of his years of service and his extraordinary contribution to our school family." She handed him a wooden plaque, the brass plate gleaming under the gymnasium lights. Solomon took it, his hand steady now, and looked at the words engraved there. "With gratitude for 19 years of service and quiet kindness. Solomon Birch, Jefferson School." The audience began to applaud. It started slowly, a few claps here and there, and then it grew, building and building until the gymnasium was filled with the sound of hands coming together, rising and swelling like a wave. Solomon stood at the front of the room, holding his plaque, and felt something crack open inside him. He had spent so many years being invisible, doing his work in the margins, expecting nothing in return. And now, suddenly, he was seen, truly seen, and it was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once. He opened his mouth to say something, to offer some words of thanks, but before he could speak, he saw movement in the third row. Marisol Vega was standing up. She was making her way to the key aisle, her small face set with determination, her eyes fixed on Solomon. Her mother tried to catch her arm, to pull her back, but Marisol gently shook her off and kept walking. The applause faded as people noticed her. A small girl in a purple dress, walking toward the front of the gymnasium with the kind of quiet courage that silences rooms. She stopped in front of Solomon and looked up at him. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Mr. Birch," she said, her voice small but clear in the sudden stillness. "Thank you." 2 words. Just 2 words. But they contained everything. All the mornings in the cafeteria, all the cups of cocoa, all the lunches paid for and muffins left on tables, all the small kindnesses that had sustained her through the hardest year of her young life. Solomon looked down at this child, this small, fierce girl who had somehow found the courage to walk across a gymnasium full of strangers, and he felt his eyes fill with tears. "You're welcome," he said softly, and then, before he quite knew what was happening, she had wrapped her arms around him in a hug. Her head came up to his chest, and she pressed her face against his pressed white shirt, and he stood there, stunned, his arms slowly coming up to return the embrace. The gymnasium erupted in applause again, louder this time, sustained. People were standing now, rising from their chairs to clap. Some were crying. Solomon saw Dr. Reeves wiping her eyes with a tissue. He saw Marisol's mother standing in the third row, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. And he held on to Marisol, this child who had somehow become his purpose, and let the warmth of the moment wash over him like sunlight breaking through clouds. Later that evening, after the ceremony had ended and the chairs had been folded and stacked, and the gymnasium restored to its usual emptiness, Solomon sat on his porch at home and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The plaque rested in his lap, and he traced the engraved letters with his finger, still not quite believing that any of it had been real. A car pulled into his driveway. He looked up to see an old sedan, dusty and dented, with a woman behind the wheel, Elena Vega. She got out of the car slowly, as if uncertain of her welcome, and walked toward the porch with her daughter at her side. Solomon stood to greet them. "Mr. Birch," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "I hope we're not disturbing you." "Not at all," he said. "Please sit down. Can I get you anything? Iced tea? Lemonade?" They sat on the porch chairs, the 3 of them, as the evening light turned golden and the cicadas began their summer song. Elena thanked him, really thanked him, with tears and broken sentences and a gratitude so profound it seemed to fill the entire porch. She told him about the past year, about losing her husband to an accident, about working 2 jobs to keep her family afloat, about the guilt she felt for not being able to provide more for her children. "I didn't know," she said, "about the lunches. I didn't know anyone was helping her. I thought she was just eating the free snacks. I didn't want to ask. I was so tired and so scared, and I just—" She broke off, unable to continue. Solomon reached over and patted her hand gently. "You've been doing your best," he said. "That's all any of us can do." Marisol sat quietly between them, listening to the adults talk. At some point, she slipped her small hand into Solomon's large one and held it there, and he let her, feeling the trust in that simple gesture, the connection that had grown between them over all those early mornings in the cafeteria. "Mr. Birch," Elena said eventually, her voice steadier now, "I want to pay you back, every penny. It might take me a while, but I will." Solomon shook his head. I don't want your money, ma'am. I gave it freely, and I don't want it back. What I want, he paused, searching for the right words. What I want is for Marisol to keep working hard in school, to keep making those beautiful paintings, to believe in herself, because she's got something special in her, and the world needs to see it. Elena looked at her daughter, then back at Solomon, and nodded slowly. I can do that, she said. We can do that. They stayed until the stars came out, talking softly in the summer darkness. Solomon learned about Elena's childhood in Mexico, about her dreams of becoming a teacher before life took her in a different direction. He learned about Marisol's love of art, how she spent hours drawing in notebooks, creating worlds on paper that were more beautiful than the one she lived in. He learned about Tomas, the first grader, who wanted to be an astronaut and had memorized the names of all the planets. And they learned about him, about Loretta and the life they had built together, about his garden and his morning routines and his quiet devotion to the school that had become his second home, about the loneliness that had settled over him since his wife's death, and how caring for Marisol had given him a sense of purpose again. By the time they left, something had shifted. They were no longer strangers connected by circumstance. They were something else, not quite family, but something close to it, something warm and real and sustaining. You'll come for dinner, Elena said as she walked to her car. It was not a question. Sunday, 6 o'clock. I'll make tamales. Solomon smiled. I'd like that. He watched their tail lights disappear down the road, then sat back down on his porch and listened to the night sounds of Cedarhollow. The crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the whisper of wind through the trees. The plaque was still in his lap, and he held it carefully, this small piece of wood and brass that represented so much more than he had ever expected. He thought about Loretta, and what she would have said about all of this. She would have been proud, he decided. She would have teased him about his embarrassment at the ceremony, about how red his face had turned when Dr. Reeves called his name, but she would have been proud. He was sure of that. I'm trying, Lor, he said softly, to the empty chair beside him, to the stars overhead, to whatever part of her might still be listening. I'm trying to do right. The summer that followed was one of the warmest Cedarhollow had seen in years. The days stretched long and golden, filled with the hum of bees and the scent of cut grass and the lazy pleasure of time moving slowly. Solomon tended his garden with extra care, coaxing tomatoes and peppers from the rich mountain soil, watching the squash vines spread across the beds in thick green tangles. Every Sunday, he drove to the Vegas small apartment on the east side of town for dinner. Elena cooked elaborate meals, tamales and enchiladas and pozole and dishes whose names Solomon couldn't pronounce, but whose flavors he would remember forever. They ate at the small kitchen table, the four of them crowded together, and talked about everything and nothing. The easy conversation of people who had become comfortable with each other. Marisol showed him her drawings. She had started a new series that summer, watercolors of the mountains at different times of day. Dawn, noon, dusk, night. Each one was more beautiful than the last, the colors growing bolder, the compositions more confident. Solomon hung them on his refrigerator, and when visitors came, which was rare but not unheard of, he pointed them out with quiet pride. My friend Marisol painted those, he would say. She's going to be famous someday. Tomas, not to be outdone, insisted on showing Solomon his latest space drawings. He had progressed from simple rockets to elaborate space stations, complete with tiny astronauts floating in the void. Solomon examined each one with appropriate solemnity, asking questions about fuel systems and orbital trajectories, treating the boy's imagination with the respect it deserved. Elena, for her part, began to relax in ways Solomon suspected she hadn't in years. The constant tension in her shoulders seemed to ease. She laughed more easily. She started talking about taking night classes, maybe getting her GED, maybe eventually going to community college. Dreams she had put aside were slowly emerging again, fragile and tentative, like seedlings pushing through hard soil. "You did this," she told Solomon one evening, as they sat on her small balcony watching the sunset. The children were inside, absorbed in a movie. "You made this possible." Solomon shook his head. "You were already doing the hard work. I just helped a little." "A little," she repeated and laughed softly. "You fed my daughter for 2 years, Mr. Birch. You gave her hope when I couldn't. That's not a little." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned pink and orange and purple, the mountains fading into silhouettes against the evening light. Summer faded into fall, and fall into winter, and the cycle of the school year began again. Marisol was in 5th grade now, taller than she had been, her face losing some of its childhood softness. She still arrived early, still sat in the cafeteria corner, but now she often had a book with her, something from the library, and she would read while Solomon worked, both of them comfortable in their separate activities. Her lunch account stayed full. Solomon made sure of that. But something had changed since the graduation ceremony. He was no longer the only one contributing. Other parents had been moved by the story, and they had started a fund, a small pool of money to help families in need. Dr. Reeves administered it with her usual efficiency, and the quiet shame of an empty lunch account became a thing of the past for many children at Jefferson School. Solomon's plaque hung in the main hallway, near the display case that held sports trophies and academic awards. He passed it every day on his rounds, and every day he felt a small flush of embarrassment at seeing his name there. But he also felt something else, a warmth, a sense of belonging that he hadn't experienced since Loretta's death. He was part of this place, truly part of it, and that meant something. The years that followed were kind ones. Marisol flourished in school, her grades improving steadily, her artwork gaining recognition. She won a regional art competition in 7th grade, and Solomon drove 2 hours to attend the award ceremony, sitting in the back row and clapping until his hands hurt. She started talking about art school, about scholarships, about a future that seemed suddenly possible in ways it hadn't been before. Elena got her GED and enrolled in nursing classes at the community college. She worked fewer hours at the grocery store now, the nursing program offering a stipend that helped cover the gap. She spoke about the future with hope instead of fear, making plans that extended beyond survival, imagining a life instead of just enduring one. Tomas grew tall and serious, his obsession with space giving way to a broader interest in science. He talked about NASA and SpaceX and Artemis missions with the kind of detailed knowledge that impressed his teachers and exhausted his family. Solomon bought him a telescope for his 13th birthday, and they spent many evenings on the porch, peering at Saturn's rings and Jupiter's moons while the summer crickets sang. And Solomon himself continued his quiet work at Jefferson School. He swept and mopped and fixed and maintained, moving through his routines with the ease of long practice. His hair grew whiter. His steps grew a little slower. But he was there every morning at 5:30, unlocking the sticky side door, beginning his rounds, making sure everything was ready for another day. He thought often about Loretta during those years, about what she would have thought of all this unexpected family he had found, these connections he had made. He talked to her sometimes in the quiet moments, telling her about Marisol's latest painting or Elena's nursing exams or Tomas's plans for college. He liked to think she heard him. He liked to think she was proud. The morning of Marisol's 8th grade graduation arrived in late May. The air soft and warm, the mountains green with spring growth. Solomon had helped set up the chairs again, just as he had 4 years before. But this time was different. This time, he had a seat reserved in the front row, right next to Elena and Tomas, marked with a small placard that read, "Reserved. Family." He put on his best white shirt and his only tie, a dark blue one that Loretta had given him for their anniversary years ago. He arrived early, as he always did, but instead of retreating to his supply closet, he sat in his reserved seat and waited, his hands folded in his lap, his heart full of something that felt like joy. The ceremony began at 10 o'clock. The graduates filed in, small and solemn in their robes, and found their seats. Marisol was near the front, her cap slightly crooked, her face bright with nervous excitement. When she saw Solomon in the front row, she smiled, a real smile, wide and warm, and gave him a small wave. He waved back, feeling tears prick at his eyes. The speeches came and went. The awards were presented, and then, as the ceremony neared its end, Dr. Reeves returned to the podium. She was grayer now, closer to retirement, but her voice was still strong and clear. "Before we present the diplomas," she said, "I'd like to call one of our graduates to the stage for a special presentation. Marisol Vega, would you please come forward?" Marisol stood, confusion flickering across her face, and made her way to the stage. She climbed the steps carefully, her robe swishing, and stood beside Dr. Reeves with the uncertain posture of someone who doesn't know what's coming. "Marisol," Dr. Reeves said, "your teachers have selected you to receive this year's Jefferson School Art Award. This award recognizes a student who has shown exceptional talent and dedication to the visual arts, and who exemplifies the creativity and perseverance that we value in our school community." She handed Marisol a certificate and a small trophy, and the audience applauded. But Dr. Reeves held up her hand, indicating there was more. "In addition," she continued, "I'm pleased to announce that Marisol has been awarded a full scholarship to the Virginia Summer Arts Academy, where she will spend 4 weeks this July studying with some of the finest art instructors in the state." The applause grew louder. Elena grabbed Solomon's arm, her grip tight with emotion. Tomas was cheering, his teenage dignity temporarily forgotten. Marisol stood on the stage, clutching her certificate, looking stunned. Then her eyes found Solomon, in the front row, and her expression shifted into something softer, something full of understanding. "Thank you," she said into the microphone, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you to my teachers, and to Dr. Reeves, and to my family. My mom, my brother, and—" She paused, her gaze still fixed on Solomon. "And Mr. Birch, who saw me when I thought I was invisible, who helped me when I thought no one would, who showed me that kindness can change everything." She was crying now, and Solomon was crying too, and Elena was sobbing openly, and even Tomas was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Thank you," Marisol said again, "for believing in me." She left the stage and walked straight to Solomon, and he stood, and she hugged him the way she had 4 years ago, pressing her face against his chest, holding on tight. But she was taller now, her arms reaching higher, and he felt the difference, felt the years that had passed, felt the child she had been transforming into the young woman she was becoming. "I'm proud of you," he whispered into her hair. "So proud." "I know," she whispered back. "I know you are." The reception afterward was held in the cafeteria, the same cafeteria where Solomon had set up a table for a small, tired girl all those years ago. Now it was decorated with streamers and balloons, filled with graduates and their families, the noise and joy of celebration filling every corner. Solomon stood near the back, watching the crowd, content to observe from the margins as he had always preferred. But people kept finding him. Parents who wanted to shake his hand, teachers who wanted to thank him, children who remembered the kind janitor who had helped them with a stuck locker or a lost pencil or just a gentle word on a hard day. At some point, Dr. Reeves appeared at his elbow. "Quite a day, Mr. Birch," she said. "Yes, ma'am. Quite a day." She studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said, "I've been at this school for almost 20 years. I've seen a lot of people come and go, teachers, staff, students, but I've never known anyone quite like you." Solomon shifted uncomfortably. I'm just the janitor, Dr. Reeves. No, she said firmly. You're not just anything. You're the heart of this place. You always have been. She paused. I'm retiring next year. Did you know that? He nodded. He had heard rumors. The school board wants to do something special for my retirement, she continued. Some kind of ceremony or event. I told them I'd only agree if they did something for you too. She smiled. Something appropriate. Something that recognizes everything you've done. Solomon opened his mouth to protest, but she held up her hand. Don't argue with me, Solomon. You've earned it. Let people thank you for once. He closed his mouth. Then slowly, he nodded. All right, he said. All right. She patted his arm and moved away to greet another family, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He looked around the cafeteria at all these people he had served for so many years and felt a wave of something that might have been gratitude, or might have been love, or might have been both. Marisol found him a few minutes later, still clutching her certificate and trophy. She was glowing, lit up from inside with happiness. Mr. Birch, she said, can I show you something? Of course. She led him out of the cafeteria, down the quiet hallway, to the art room near the back of the building. It was empty now, the tables clean, the supplies neatly stored. But on the wall, in a place of honor, hung a large painting, a watercolor, rendered in soft blues and greens and golds. It showed a mountain landscape at sunrise. The peaks were touched with pink light, and mist curled through the valleys, and in the foreground, barely visible, was a small figure walking a path toward the light. I painted this for you, Marisol said quietly, for everything you did. I wanted you to have it, but Mrs. Chen said it was too good to give away. So she asked if she could display it here, where everyone can see it. She looked up at him, her dark eyes bright. Is that okay? Solomon stood before the painting, taking in every detail, the careful brushstrokes, the delicate colors, the way the light seemed to glow from within the canvas. It was beautiful. More than beautiful. It was alive. It's perfect, he said, his voice rough. It's absolutely perfect. Marisol smiled and slipped her hand into his, the way she had when she was 9 years old, sitting in the cafeteria waiting for the sun to rise. Thank you, Mr. Birch, she said, for everything. Thank you, he replied, for letting me help. They stood together in the quiet art room, looking at the painting as the sounds of celebration drifted down the hallway. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm and golden, and the mountains stood watch over the valley, ancient and patient and full of light. That evening, Solomon drove home slowly, taking the long way through town. He passed the church where he and Loretta had been married, and the diner where they had eaten every Sunday after services, and the park where they had walked hand in hand on summer evenings. The memories were soft now, worn smooth by time, no longer sharp with grief, but warm with gratitude. He pulled into his driveway as the sun touched the western mountains. The house was quiet, as it always was, but it no longer felt lonely. It felt full of memories, full of purpose, full of love. He sat on the porch and watched the sunset, thinking about the day, about Marisol's painting, about all the years that had led to this moment. He thought about the choices we make, the small kindnesses that ripple outward in ways we can never predict. He thought about Loretta and how she had always believed in the goodness of people, in the power of compassion to transform lives. We did okay, Lore, he said softly, to the empty chair beside him, to the gathering dusk. We did okay. The summer stretched out before him, full of promise. Sunday dinners with the Vega family, long evenings in the garden, the quiet rhythm of days spent in service to others. It was a good life, he realized. A simple life, maybe, but a good one. And it was enough. The years continued to turn, as years do, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows, its own small miracles and quiet griefs. Solomon grew older, his hair turning from silver to white, his steps slowing a little more with each passing season. But he kept working at the school, kept arriving at 5:30 every morning to unlock the sticky side door and begin his rounds. Marisol went to art school in Richmond, just as she had dreamed. She called Solomon every Sunday evening, telling him about her classes and her projects and the life she was building in the city. She came home for holidays and summers, always bringing new paintings to show him, always asking about his garden and his health and the news from Jefferson School. Elena finished her nursing degree and got a job at the hospital in town. She bought a small house on Maple Lane, just 2 blocks from Solomon's cottage, and they fell into an easy routine of shared meals and quiet evenings. 2 people who had become family without ever quite meaning to. Tomas went off to college to study astrophysics, his childhood dreams of space finally taking concrete form. He sent Solomon postcards from the places he visited, observatories in Arizona, research facilities in California, once even a space launch in Florida that left him speechless with wonder. And through it all, Solomon continued his quiet work. He swept and mopped and fixed and maintained. He watched new generations of children pass through the hallways of Jefferson School, each one unique, each one deserving of care. He left muffins on cafeteria tables for early arrivals. He fixed stuck lockers and returned dropped pencils. He did what he could in his own small way to make the world a little kinder. On the morning of his 80th birthday, Solomon woke before dawn, as he always did. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to the silence of the house, feeling the weight of years in his bones. Outside, the first birds were beginning to sing. He got up slowly, dressed in his usual work clothes, and drove to the school. The parking lot was empty, the building dark. He unlocked the sticky side door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar smell of floor wax and old books and something that might have been called hope. He walked the hallways one last time, running his hand along the walls, saying goodbye to the building that had been his home for so many years. 24 years now, almost a quarter of a century. It seemed impossible, and yet here he was at the end of it, still standing, still breathing, still grateful for every moment. He had decided to retire, not because he wanted to. He could have worked forever if his body allowed it, but because it was time. Time to rest. Time to enjoy the years he had left. Time to sit on his porch and watch the mountains and remember. The retirement ceremony was held that afternoon in the gymnasium where so many graduations had taken place. The room was full, current students and former students, teachers and staff and community members who had heard about the quiet janitor who had given so much. Marisol came from Richmond, and Elena was there with Tomas, who had flown in from California just for the occasion. Dr. Margaret Chen, who had taken over as principal after Dr. Reeves retired, gave a speech about Solomon's years of service. She talked about the lunches he had paid for, the children he had helped, the countless small kindnesses that had made Jefferson School a better place. She talked about the scholarship fund that had been established in his name, which would help families in need for generations to come. And then, one by one, people came to the microphone to share their memories. Teachers talked about finding fresh coffee waiting for them every morning. Parents talked about the janitor who had calmed their crying children on difficult first days. Former students, now adults with children of their own, talked about the kind old man who had fixed their lockers and remembered their names and made them feel like they mattered. Marisol spoke last. She was 32 years old now, a successful artist with paintings hanging in galleries across the country. But standing at that podium, looking at Solomon in the front row, she was 9 years old again, small and scared and hungry, waiting for someone to see her. "When I was a child," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion, "I thought I was invisible. I thought no one noticed me, No one cared whether I succeeded or failed. And then Mr. Birch came into my life." She paused, gathering herself. "He didn't give me money or advice or lectures about working hard. He gave me something more important. He gave me dignity. He treated me like I mattered, like my presence in this school was valuable, like my future was worth investing in. He fed me when I was hungry, not just food, but hope. And that hope changed everything." She looked directly at Solomon, and he looked back at her, and in that moment, all the years fell away. "Thank you, Mr. Birch," she said, "for seeing me, for believing in me, for teaching me, through your example, what it means to be truly kind." The audience rose to their feet, applauding, and Solomon sat in his chair, overwhelmed and grateful and full of peace. He had never wanted recognition, never sought attention for the things he had done. But receiving it now, at the end of his working life, from these people he had served and loved, it felt like coming home. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the cafeteria, just as there had been at so many graduations over the years. Solomon moved through the crowd slowly, shaking hands and accepting hugs and trying to memorize every face. These were his people. This was his community. He would carry them with him always. Late in the afternoon, when most of the guests had gone home and the cafeteria was being cleaned up, Solomon slipped away to walk the hallways one more time. He passed the display case with its trophies and plaques. He passed Marisol's painting, still hanging in the art room, still glowing with that soft inner light. He passed the cafeteria corner where a small table had once waited by the east window, and he stood there for a moment, remembering. A hand slipped into his. He looked down to see Marisol standing beside him, her dark hair streaked with gray now, her face carrying the lines of a life well lived. "Ready to go home?" she asked. He looked around the cafeteria one last time, at the folded tables, the quiet serving line, the windows catching the last of the afternoon light. "Yes," he said. "I'm ready." They walked out together, through the hallways and past the front office, and out the main doors into the warm afternoon. Elena and Tomas were waiting by the car, and they all drove to Solomon's cottage on Maple Lane, where a small party had been prepared. Just the four of them, plus a few neighbors, celebrating quietly as the sun went down. Solomon sat on his porch that evening, surrounded by the people he loved most in the world. The mountains were soft purple silhouettes against the darkening sky, and the first stars were beginning to appear, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill was singing its evening song. He thought about all the years, all the mornings at 5:30, all the hallways swept and doorknobs polished and small kindnesses offered. He thought about Loretta and how she would have loved this moment, this gathering of family and friends. He thought about the children he had served, the lives he had touched without ever quite meaning to, and he felt, for the first time in a very long time, that everything was exactly as it should be. Marisol came to sit beside him, bringing him a cup of coffee, fixed just the way he liked it. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, searching for words. "I'm thinking about how strange life is," he said finally. "How you never know which small thing is going to matter. A cup of cocoa on a cold morning, a muffin left on a table, a little girl who needed someone to notice her." He paused, looking up at the stars. "I didn't plan any of it. I just did what seemed right one day at a time. And somehow, it turned into this." Marisol leaned her head against his shoulder. "That's how most of the best things happen," she said. "Not through big plans, but through small choices, made with love, over and over again." He smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. "Your grandmother would have liked you," he said. "She would have been proud." "I think she would have liked you too," Marisol replied. "The way you turned out, the man you became." They sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the sounds of summer and the warmth of family, as the night settled gently over Cedarhollow. And Solomon Birch, 80 years old, finally retired, full of memories and love and peace, closed his eyes and breathed deeply and felt himself beginning to drift toward rest. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and patient. The mountains kept their watch, and in a small cottage on Maple Lane, in a quiet valley in Virginia, a good man rested at last, his work complete, his heart full, his legacy written not in monuments or awards, but in the lives he had touched, the kindness he had shared, the love he had given so freely for so many years. Sleep came to him softly, like a warm blanket being laid across his shoulders, and in his dreams, he walked the hallways of Jefferson School once more, checking that everything was ready, making sure the world was prepared to welcome another generation of children. Because that was who he was. That was what he did. And it was enough. It had always been enough. The night was soft now, wrapping around the valley like a gentle embrace. The stars burned quietly overhead, their ancient light filtering down through the atmosphere to touch the rooftops of Cedarhollow with silver. A breeze stirred the leaves of the old oak tree in Solomon's front yard, creating a whisper of sound that blended with the distant murmur of the river and the occasional call of a nightbird settling into sleep. Inside the cottage, the lights had dimmed. The guests had gone home, leaving only the quiet presence of family. Elena had tucked herself into the guest room, tired from the day's emotions, but peaceful. Tomas had stretched out on the living room couch, his long frame barely fitting, already drifting into the deep sleep of the young. Marisol had taken the small bedroom at the end of the hall, the one that had once been Loretta's sewing room, filled with soft fabrics and the faint scent of lavender. And Solomon lay in his own bed, in the room he had shared with his wife for so many years, feeling the familiar contours of the mattress beneath him, the soft weight of the quilt that Loretta had made during their first winter together. The moonlight came through the window in pale streams, illuminating the photograph on his nightstand, Loretta smiling, her eyes bright, her hand reaching toward the camera as if reaching toward him across the years. He closed his eyes and let the silence wash over him. In the quiet darkness, memories came to him like old friends stopping by for a visit. He remembered his first day at Jefferson School, how nervous he had been, how large the building had seemed. He remembered learning the names of the teachers, the rhythms of the schedule, the particular squeak of the third-floor hallway that meant the boards needed waxing. He remembered watching children grow from kindergartners to 8th graders, some of them becoming teachers themselves, some of them sending their own children back to the same school where they had learned to read and write and become themselves. He remembered Marisol. That first morning, so early, the small girl with the too big sweater and the tired eyes. He remembered how she had accepted the cup of cocoa without comment, how she had watched the sunrise through the cafeteria windows, how she had slowly, gradually, begun to bloom under his quiet care. He had not known back then what she would become. He had not known about the paintings, the scholarships, the life she would build. He had only known that she was a child who needed help, and he had the ability to provide it. That was all. The simplest equation in the world. And yet, somehow that simple equation had expanded into something vast and beautiful, like ripples spreading across a still pond, like seeds scattered on fertile ground. This, Solomon thought, is what a life is made of. Not the grand gestures or the public recognitions, but the small moments, the cup of cocoa, the fixed locker, the kind word offered at just the right time. These were the building blocks of a good life, and he had been blessed to lay them, one by one, for so many years. His breathing slowed. His thoughts grew soft and hazy around the edges. The sounds of the night, the wind, the river, the settling house, became a kind of music, lulling him deeper into rest. He thought of Loretta again, and this time, instead of grief, he felt only warmth. She was there, somewhere, not in this room, not in this world, but close, waiting for him when his time came. He could feel her presence like the heat of a banked fire, gentle and constant. Soon, he whispered to her, to the empty room, to the stars. But not yet. There were still mornings to sit on the porch, still sunsets to watch over the mountains, still dinners with Elena and Marisol and Tomas, this unexpected family that had become his greatest joy. He was tired, yes, and his body ached with the weight of years, but he was not ready to leave, not quite yet. Sleep pulled at him now, insistent but gentle. He let himself sink into it, feeling the boundaries of his body soften, feeling himself become light and free. In his dreams, he walked through a garden. It was a beautiful garden, filled with flowers that Loretta would have loved, roses and peonies and sunflowers turning their faces toward the sun. A path wound through the beds, leading toward a distant horizon where the mountains met the sky. And there, walking ahead of him on the path, was a small figure. A girl in a purple sweater, her dark hair in a ponytail, her steps confident and sure. She turned to look back at him, and she smiled. "Come on, Mr. Birch," Marisol said. "There's more to see." He followed her along the path, feeling the warm sunlight on his face, feeling the soft earth beneath his feet. The garden stretched on, forever, full of color and life, and he walked through it with wonder, knowing that this was what it meant to have lived well. This was the harvest. This was the fruit. The sun was setting in the dream, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The mountains glowed with soft fire, and the air smelled of flowers and earth and something that might have been hope. Solomon stopped walking and turned to face the sunset. He stood there for a long time, watching the light fade, feeling the peace of it settle into his bones. "Thank you," he said, to the garden, to the sunset, to everyone he had ever loved. And the evening answered him with silence, and with warmth, and with rest. The cottage on Maple Lane was quiet now. The wind had died down, and the river's murmur had softened to a whisper. The stars continued their slow rotation overhead, marking the passage of time with patient indifference. Inside, Solomon slept deeply, dreamlessly, his breath slow and even. The moonlight touched his face, and he looked peaceful, all the years falling away, leaving only the essence of who he was. A man who had spent his life in service to others, asking nothing in return. Marisol woke in the early hours before dawn. She wasn't sure what had roused her. Perhaps a sound, perhaps a feeling. She lay in the narrow bed, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of something she couldn't name. She rose quietly, wrapping herself in the old cardigan she had found in the closet, and padded down the hall to Solomon's room. The door was open a crack, as it always was, and she pushed it gently and looked inside. He was sleeping, just sleeping. His chest rose and fell with quiet regularity, and his face was relaxed, untroubled by dreams. On the nightstand, Loretta's photograph caught a glint of starlight, watching over him, as she always had. Marisol stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching. This man who had changed her life. This man who had taught her, without ever meaning to, what kindness really meant. He looked so small in the big bed, so fragile, and yet, somehow he had been strong enough to carry all of them. Her mother, her brother, the hundreds of children at Jefferson School, through their hardest times. "Thank you," she whispered, so softly that the words barely left her lips. Then she pulled the door closed gently and went back to her room, and lay in the darkness, and cried. Not from sadness, but from gratitude, from love, from the overwhelming grace of having been seen and valued by this quiet, extraordinary man. Outside, the first light of dawn was beginning to touch the eastern sky. The stars faded slowly, one by one, As the sun prepared to make its daily climb, the mountains emerged from the darkness, their peaks catching the first pink rays, their forests awakening with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. A new day was beginning. The world was turning, as it always did, carrying all of them forward into whatever came next. And in his bed in the cottage on Maple Lane, Solomon Birch slept on, dreaming perhaps of gardens and sunsets, of children and coffee, and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Rest now, the morning seemed to say. Rest and be at peace. You have earned it. You have earned every moment of it. The light grew stronger, spreading across the valley, touching the rooftops of Cedarhollow with gold. Somewhere, a church bell began to ring, soft and distant, marking the hour, and the day began, as all days do, with hope, with possibility, with the quiet promise that there is always more good to be done in this world, if only we have the courage to do it. Solomon had shown them that. Solomon had lived it every day for 80 years, and now, resting in the gentle embrace of sleep, he passed that truth on to all who had known him, like a torch being handed from one runner to the next, continuing the endless, beautiful race toward kindness, toward compassion, toward love. Sleep well, the world whispered to him, as the sun rose higher and the day came fully alive. Sleep well, Solomon Birch. You made us better than we were. The end.